Many times I've heard people use the word depression in place of sadness. So it's a very common term that people use to denote how they feel. Well, I'm depressed, I'm feeling so depressed, I'm in depression, when actually they mean to say that I'm feeling sad, I'm experiencing the emotion of sadness. So it's really important to understand the difference between these two terms, and they're quite overlapping because people associate depression with extreme sadness, which is considered to be one of the signs in depression, but not all. Now, when we confuse these two terms, it can so happen that sometimes, you end up overreacting, wherein you just have a normal emotional state of sadness and then you tend to exaggerate and believe that it's depression. And sometimes the opposite can happen where the person is going through depression but is just taking it to be extreme sadness. So, sadness, let's begin with sadness. Sadness is a very normal human emotion, just like happiness, and it's experienced by all of us. Usually, it's triggered by some event which has caused you hurt, challenge, it's caused you disappointment, and you go through the feeling of sadness in relation to that event. So, it's always got to be something you feel sad about something. So, this also means that when that event changes or when that situation changes, over time, the emotional feeling of sadness, the feeling of hurt reduces, or you kind of get adjusted. You get over the loss or the disappointment, and sadness is replaced by some other emotion. Therefore, it is really temporary. So, just like happiness, you experience it in moments, and it passes as you adjust or cope with the situation. Now, depression, on the other hand, is a mental illness, and this affects our thoughts, our emotions, our perceptions, our behavior, our day to day activities. So, when somebody is depressed, they generally feel sad about everything. It's not to do with one particular situation or event, but it's generally that that situation is merely a trigger and you end up feeling sad about every single thing. So you are disinterested, you don't find enjoyment in activities that you earlier did, you feel less important, less lovable, less worthwhile, you have a sense of hopelessness. Your energies are constantly drained without having done anything, so you're not able to perform your daily activities. Sometimes eating is affected, so food habits are affected, and generally there is no experience of joy or pleasure, and you have quicker breakdowns, and it's difficult to bounce back from everything. So when somebody is in depression, of course you can't tell them snap out of it, it's just in your head, it's a phase. The person needs to be diagnosed. So there are certain criteria that people use for diagnosis, and the symptoms need to be present for a particular period of time for it to be classified as a full blown case of depression. The severity of the symptoms are considered, whether the person has had an irritable or depressed mood most of the time through the day, a lack of interest in activities, and those activities especially that previously were found to be pleasurable, changes in weight, in appetite, like I was talking about the food habits, then oversleeping or lack of sleep, either of those, slowed movements, restlessness, constant feeling of tiredness, lack of energy, feeling of guilt or worthlessness, hopelessness, not able to think, not able to perform mental functions, lack of focus, concentration, uh, poor decision making skills. And of course, in the severe cases, suicidal thoughts and ideations. So, all of these become important when you're diagnosing depression. That's why it's really important to understand the difference between the two. When you're going through something, feeling, say, feeling low, feeling sad, being upset, it's important to understand where it's coming from and keeping this in mind. And that's why I always say do not use terms loosely. Be mindful of when you're using terms like depression. Another thing about sadness that I'd like to add is that keeping in mind that it's a normal human emotion, it's good to learn to accept it. Because if we don't know sadness, then we don't really know happiness. So, when something happens, when an event triggers feelings of sadness, it's good to accept it. It's good to be vulnerable, to accept that we're feeling that way, acknowledge it, and then coming out of it becomes easier. So, be mindful of the triggering events, learn to accept your emotion, learn to accept your feelings, and of course, like we always say, you know, learn to reach out. If you feel like it's prolonged and there's something alarming and you feel like you need help, then just reach out and talk to somebody. Hope this differentiation helps y'all understand what you're going through and effectively deal with it.